record number of unaccompanied migrant children were taken into U.S. custody this fiscal year. New government data obtained by CBS News shows the federal shelter system received 122,000 children who were without their guardians. The previous record was 69,000 in fiscal year 2019. For more, let's bring in Camilo Montoya-Galvez, our immigration reporter. Camilo, Merry Christmas Eve.
Hi, good morning, Bradley.
Good morning. So what led to this significant number of unaccompanied minors entering federal custody this year? And has the number of children that are crossing the U.S. border slowed down since the wave this summer?
Well, let's start with the fact, Bradley, that 92% of the unaccompanied children who entered the federal government's shelter system in fiscal year 2021 were from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And we know that certain conditions in these Central American countries, such as hunger, poverty, lack of economic opportunities, displacement caused by climate change, and lack of economic opportunities are all factors that push young people to migrate north to the U.S.-Mexico border, many with the help of smugglers. We know that many of these children and teenagers come here to reunite with family members. According to government estimates, about 80% of the unaccompanied children who enter U.S. custody have family members here in the U.S., and many of those family members, such as uncles, grandparents, and some parents, sponsor them out of federal custody, rather. There's also the notion among some smugglers and migrants that the U.S. has more welcoming policies now under President Biden than during the Trump administration, which, as you know, Bradley, implemented several policies to deter migrants from reaching U.S. soil and to restrict access to the U.S. asylum system. And it is very important to note that many of these children do, in fact, come with adult family members when they arrive at the U.S.-Mexico border, but some come with family members who are not their parents or legal guardians, and that's why they are classified as unaccompanied minors. There are also children who come with their parents to the border, but their parents allow them to present themselves to U.S. border officials alone, because unaccompanied children are the only population currently that is exempted from a policy that allows border officials to rapidly expel migrants to Mexico or to their home country without letting them seek asylum.
So, Camilo, do we know how many unaccompanied migrant children are currently in HHS custody? Is the department doing anything to expedite the placement of children with sponsors?
Yes, there are nearly 12,000 unaccompanied children currently in the custody of the Department of Health and Human Services, which again is charged with caring for these minors until it finds a suitable sponsor for them here in the U.S. or until these children turn of legal age. Then they are transferred out of this agency. We know that the number of unaccompanied children coming to the U.S. border has decreased since the summer when it reached a record monthly high, but border officials still recorded about 14,000 apprehensions of migrant children last month, and that is the highest tally, Bradley, for any November in history. So we can see these numbers continue to go back up next year, and that is likely because we always see an increase in migration to the U.S.-Mexico border every spring.
Camilo, we've now had almost a full year of a new administration in the White House. How has President Biden handled the surge in child migrants differently compared to President Trump?
Yes, so just weeks after President Biden took office, we saw Border Patrol stations become severely overcrowded with families and unaccompanied children whom HHS did not have the space to process or to house. HHS shelters had their capacity limited by coronavirus mitigation protocols, and because there was this sharp increase in the number of children, the department did not have adequate bed space for all the minors who were crossing the border without their parents. In response, the Biden administration, Bradley, had to set up all of these makeshift housing facilities at convention centers, military installations, work camps, and other facilities to accommodate the record influx of unaccompanied minors. These facilities reduced the dangerous and severe overcrowding at the Border Patrol stations along the U.S.-Mexico border, but they also came with some risks. We know that many of these places were never designed to hold children, especially for prolonged periods of time, and we saw reports of children reporting mental health distress and prolonged stays at these facilities. There were some reports of inadequate services at some facilities, which abruptly closed during the summer and during the spring. And at one Army base in Texas, some children were constantly monitored for incidents of self-harm and escape attempts and panic attacks because of the prolonged stays at these emergency sites. So that is still a concern for some advocates, that this could play out again next year if HHS does not make the necessary plans to accommodate another potential spike in border arrivals of unaccompanied children.
And Camilo, what do things look like right now at those facilities where children are being processed? Have things improved?
Yes, HHS set up more than a dozen of these emergency housing facilities earlier this year. Most have since closed, Bradley, except for 3, including the Fort Bliss Army Base in West Texas. HHS has also taken several remedial steps to improve case management and other services at these facilities. And as we speak, there are about 2,800 unaccompanied children at these 3 emergency sites that are still open. So the vast majority of unaccompanied children in HHS care are in traditional shelters that have licenses by states that testify that these facilities can care for minors and that have adequate services. But we also know that HHS is now looking to potentially open up new emergency facilities next year if there is another sharp increase in unaccompanied children crossing the U.S.-Mexico border.
And Camilo, a little more on that. I know you've learned the Biden administration is preparing to open 2 of those emergency housing facilities if border arrivals continue to spike again next year. So what do we know about those sites and where they might be located?
Yes, we know that the Department of Health and Human Services is looking at 2 facilities, a camp in New Mexico and an academy campus in North Carolina, as potential sites for another set of emergency facilities that would be opened only if border arrivals of unaccompanied children sharply increase again. And these, again, are facilities that are specifically designed to alleviate border crowding inside Border Patrol stations, but they don't have the same standards of care and services as traditional HHS shelters. So advocates are urging the Biden administration to focus on expanding bed capacity at traditional shelters, at foster care programs, and at speeding up the processing and vetting of sponsors, because again, the main objective that HHS has once these children are in its custody is to release these children as quickly as possible to sponsors, but it has to strike a balancing act, right? Because while it does not want these children to languish in its facilities for prolonged periods of time, it also does not want to release them to sponsors who may harm them or who may engage in trafficking. So that is one concern that the Biden administration has to address next year.
Immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez. Camilo, thanks for being with us on Christmas Eve.
Thanks. Merry Christmas.
And if you want to read more of Camilo's article, just head to cbsnews.com.